Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon so that you never miss any video lesson from Rao's IAS Study Circle. Hello, welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why, and how of newspaper reading from your UPSC perspective. Today, we shall discuss these important news which has appeared in the New Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper. The time stamping for this news has been provided in the description section below. So let's start our today's discussion. Now, as you are all aware about the e-learn platform of Rao's IAS Study Circle, as you know that we provide you important study materials, prelims test for practice, mains test questions, as well as mains assignments. In the video section, with respect to video courses, you can find the DNS videos, and if you want to search any particular topic, you can search in the filter section here. Further, with respect to your main assignments, we also provide you certain important questions with respect to your UPSC mains examination, where you can participate by writing your own answer with respect to these important questions asked on this particular forum. Further, in the forum section, we post important highlights with respect to UPSC examination regarding different subjects. For example, this particular post is with respect to Indian Home Rule League movement, where the question asked was, what were the factors leading to the formation of Home Rule League? Examine the success and failures of the Home Rule League movement. Now, as you can see, that students have posted their answers as well. So you can participate in these discussions by giving your own answers and also your own comments about these important subjects. For example, with respect to the political system, the discussion was, the President of India, like the King of England, is a mere constitutional head. Do you agree? So, we understand that this e-learn platform of Rao's IAS Study Circle does not only provide you important materials as well as questions, but is also an interactive mode of learning, where you can give your own comments as well as answers with respect to the topics posted on this forum. The first news to be discussed appears on page number 2. It says, Minorities Panel Chief Charged with Sedition. Now, in this news, there are two important aspects which you must know from your UPSC examinations perspective. One is about Minority Commission, which is established at the level of union as well as at the level of state, and also about the term sedition, which has been defined under Section 124A of Indian Penal Code. Now, you must understand that the term sedition always goes hand in hand with the term freedom of speech and expression. Further, the Delhi Minorities Panel Chief has also been charged under Section 153A of Indian Penal Code. Now, Section 153A of IPC mentions about promoting enmity between different groups on grounds of religion, race, place of birth, residence, language, etc., and doing acts prejudicial to maintenance of harmony. So, these are the two provisions under which the Minorities Panel Chief of Delhi has been charged with, mainly with sedition and also under Section 153A of IPC. So, from our UPSC perspective, first of all, let us understand about the constitution and functions of Minorities Commission, both at the level of union as well as at the level of state. And then we shall try and understand the correlation between freedom of speech and expression and that of sedition, and also important Supreme Court judgments which has highlighted the nature and jurisdiction of the term sedition. Now, as described, this topic becomes important from your prelims perspective with section Indian Polity and Governance, and in your mains gets covered under GS paper 2, specifically with respect to statutory, regulatory and various quasi-judicial bodies, and also with respect to significant provisions of the Indian Constitution. Now, the National Minority Commission has been set up by the Union government under National Commission for Minorities Act of 1992. So, the National Minority Commission is a statutory body, as it has been established under a law made by the Parliament. Now, with respect to minority religion, initially there were 5 minority religions, namely Muslims, Christians, Sikhs, Buddhists, as well as Zoroastrians or Parsis. Now, through a notification in January 2014, the government also added Jain as another minority religion. So now, total number of minority religion is 6. Now, just like the union government, different state governments can also establish their own state minorities commission through an act of their state legislature. For example, the Delhi established its state minority commission under the Delhi Minorities Commission Act of 1999. And similarly, other states have also established their own minority commission under their respective acts of state legislature. So these minorities commission at the union level as well as at the state level are statutory bodies. And as you can see, statutory body is a part of your syllabus under General Studies paper 2. So the Minorities Commission helps in safeguarding and protecting the interest of minorities in India. Further, aggrieved persons of the minority community may approach these concerned commissions, that is, these respective state minority commissions or even the National Commission for Minorities with respect to redressal of their grievances. Further, these aggrieved persons belonging to minority community may also send their representation to National Minority Commission after they have exhausted all other official mechanisms of remedies which are available to them. So overall we can say that Minorities Commission, which has been established in India at the level of union as well as at the level of states, helps in safeguarding and protecting the interest of minorities in India. Now, from our examination perspective, you must know certain important aspects with respect to National Minorities Commission. As you all now know that the National Minorities Commission is established under the National Commission for Minorities Act of 1992 and it is a statutory body. Further, the National Commission for Minorities shall consist of a chairperson, a vice chairperson and 5 members which shall be nominated by the central government. So this becomes an important point to be remembered from your prelims perspective. Further, these 5 members, including the chairperson, shall be from amongst the minority communities. Next, it says that the chairperson and every member shall hold office for a term of 3 years from the date they assume office. Now, another important aspect to be known is that central government shall cause the recommendations of National Minority Commission to be laid before each house of parliament, that is both with respect to Lok Sabha as well as Rajya Sabha. And this shall be done along with a memorandum explaining the action taken or proposed to be taken with respect to recommendation of the National Minority Commission. Further, if the central government does not accept any of the proposal of National Minority Commission, then such reason shall also be provided in the House of Parliament. Now, another important aspect to be remembered is that the CAG, that is Comptroller and Auditor General of India, can audit the accounts of the National as well as State Minority Commission. Further, these commissions, while performing their functions, shall have the powers of a civil court with respect to trying a suit, and specifically with respect to the following matters. So, the National Minority Commission shall have the powers of a civil court with respect to summoning and enforcing the attendance of any person from any part of India and examining them on oath, requiring discovery and production of any document, receiving evidence on affidavits, requisitioning or demanding any public record or copy from any court or government office, as well as with respect to issuing commissions for examination of witness and document. So, the National Commission shall have the power of a civil court with respect to the following aspects. Further, it's important to note that even the state minority commissions also have powers of a civil court with respect to these following aspects. Now, after understanding about the National Minorities Commission, let us also understand about the term sedition as defined in section 124A of the Indian Penal Code. It says that whoever by words, either spoken or written, or by signs, or by visible representations. So there are 3 aspects highlighted here. First is whoever by words, either spoken or written. Next is by visible representation. And the third word is or otherwise brings or attempts to bring into hatred or contempt. So the question is that whether these activities brings or attempts to bring into hatred or contempt, or excites or attempts to excite disaffection towards the government, then such activities shall be punished with imprisonment for life, to which fine may be added, or with imprisonment which may extend to 3 years, to which fine may be added. So here we see that if any person by words, that is spoken or written, through visible representation or otherwise, brings or attempts to bring into hatred or contempt, or excites or attempts to excite disaffection towards the government, can be termed as sedition. So we understand that crossing of certain limits with respect to freedom of speech and expression, and such limits amounting to cause hatred or contempt or attempts to excite disaffection towards the government, leads to sedition. So, in this regard, the question remains that what activities actually turn freedom of speech and expression into sedition? So, in this regard, let us also understand some of the important aspects or significance of freedom of speech and expression, and then we'll try to go through important highlights of important Supreme Court judgments whereby they have mentioned about when does an activity of a citizen amounts to sedition. Now, as we all know, that Article 19(1)(a) of the Indian Constitution provides for freedom of speech and expression, and it is also one of the fundamental rights of a citizen. And we can say that freedom of speech and expression is one of the most significant principles of a democracy. Further, this freedom of speech and expression is considered as first and foremost human right and first condition of liberty. It is also considered as an essence of society as it allows citizens self-fulfillment and assists in discovery of truth and strengthens decision-making ability of the individual. Now, this aspect of freedom of speech and expression has been highlighted by the Supreme Court of India in the case of Indian Express versus Union of India. Further, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of 1948 prescribes in its preamble and Article 19 that freedom of speech is a basic fundamental right. Now, even John Stuart Mill, in his book The Liberty, has advocated for free flow of ideas and expression in a society. Mill has stated that voice of citizens should not be suppressed as it helps in highlighting the popular opinion. Further, such voice also provides a platform to the suppressed so that as a platform they can convey their opinion to the government. So, in this regard, John Stuart Mill has stated that a good government is one where intelligence of the people is promoted. So, considering all these aspects with respect to freedom of speech and expression, one understands that freedom of speech and expression is one of the most significant principles of democracy and considered first and foremost human rights and first condition of liberty. However, the question remains that when does this freedom of speech and expression gets converted into sedition? So in this regard, let us go through some of the important Supreme Court judgments with respect to the term sedition. So the Supreme Court in the case of Romesh Thapar versus State of Madras declared that unless freedom of speech and expression threaten the security or tend to overthrow the state, any law imposing restriction upon the same would not fall within the purview of Article 19(2). So basically, state has the power to restrict such activities under Article 19(2) of the Indian Constitution, which the state thinks to be seditious. Further, in one of the most important case with respect to sedition, that is Kedar Nath Singh versus State of Bihar, the Constitution Bench of Supreme Court ruled in favor of constitutional validity of Section 124A of the Indian Penal Code, whereby the court held that a person can be prosecuted for sedition only if his acts caused incitement to violence or intention or tendency to create public disorder or cause disturbance of public peace. Now, three elements are highlighted here. First, if an act of a person causes incitement to violence. So, incitement to violence becomes one of the most important aspects of sedition. Second, if such an activity has a tendency to create public disorder. And third, if such an activity cause disturbance of public peace. So, three elements are highlighted with respect to this case of Kedar Nath Singh versus State of Bihar. Further, the Supreme Court stated that unless an act of a person does not incite violence or disturb public order, cannot be booked under dangerous section of sedition. So, it was here in this particular judgment whereby these three conditions became important with respect to sedition. That is, an activity of a person should incite violence, should have a tendency to create public disorder, or should cause disturbance of public peace. And unless an act of a person does not contain any of these three, such person cannot be booked under the section of sedition under IPC. Now, with respect to the Constitution Bench judgment in Kedar Nath versus State of Bihar, it's also important to understand about the judgment provided in Ram Manohar Lohia versus State of Bihar. Now, here, the Supreme Court held that the term public order has been defined and distinguished from law and order and security of state. The court observed that the difference between them is that of a degree. The court observed that one has to imagine three concentric circles. Law and order represent the largest circle. So the largest circle is law and order, within which the next circle representing public order and the smallest circle representing security of the state. So this circle represents public order and the smallest circle represents security of the state. So the court held that then it is easy to see that an act may affect law and order but not public order, just as an act may affect public order but not security of the state. Now, this aspect of difference between law and order, public order, and security of state has also been provided under Second Administrative Reform Commission with respect to the report on public order. Now, here again, the same judgment has been quoted with respect to Ram Manohar Lohia versus State of Bihar, whereby Justice Hidayatullah observed that just as public order apprehends disorders of less gravity than those affecting the security of the state. So any activity under public order is of lesser gravity as compared to an activity with respect to security of the state. Further, the justice highlights that law and order also apprehends disorders of less gravity than those affecting public order. So impact of law and order is also of a lesser degree as compared to public order. So in this regard, the Supreme Court held that it is easy to see that an act may affect law and order but not public order, just as an act may affect public order but not the security of the state. So in this regard, these three terms, that is incitement to violence or intention or tendency to create public disorder or cause disturbance of public peace, becomes very important with respect to the Supreme Court judgment of Kedarnath Singh versus State of Bihar. Now, under the case of Balwant Singh versus State of Punjab, few persons were charged with sedition for shouting Khalistan Zindabad and Raj Karega Khalsa. However, the Supreme Court acquitted such person from the charges of sedition. The court said that mere sloganeering, which evoked no public response, did not amount to sedition, for which a more overt act was required. The accused did not intend to incite people to create disorder, and no law and order problem actually occurred. So in this case as well, these aspects of law and order and public order was also discussed. Further, the Supreme Court said that the court has been categorical in saying that every criticism does not amount to sedition, and the real intent of the speech must be considered before imputing seditious intent to an act. So it was reasoned that raising some lonesome slogans a couple of times by two individuals without anything more did not constitute any threat to the government of India, nor could the same give rise to feelings of enmity or hatred among different communities or religious or other groups. So these were the reasons provided by Supreme Court in the case of Balwant Singh versus State of Punjab, when they acquitted two persons from charges of sedition for shouting Khalistan Zindabad and Raj Karega Khalsa. Further, in the case of Shreyas Singhal versus Union of India, Section 66A of the Information Technology Act was declared unconstitutional on the ground that it was in direct conflict with the fundamental right of freedom of speech and expression. The Supreme Court held that under the constitutional scheme, for the democracy to thrive, liberty of speech and expression is cardinal value and of paramount importance. The Supreme Court in the case of Shreyas Singhal versus Union of India also held that three concepts are important and fundamental in understanding the reach of freedom of speech and expression. These are discussion, advocacy, and incitement. Further, the Supreme Court held that mere discussion or even advocacy of a particular cause, howsoever unpopular, is at the heart of Article 19(1)(a). So, it is only when such discussion or advocacy reaches the level of incitement, that is the third aspect, that Article 19(2) kicks in. That is, the state can restrict such activity which incites violence or incites any kind of hatred against the government. So, the Supreme Court said that it is at this stage of incitement that a state can make any law curtailing the freedom of speech and expression that tends to cause public disorder or tends to affect sovereignty and integrity of India, security of the state, friendly relations with foreign states, etc. Now, in another important judgment, Delhi High Court in the case of Javed Habib versus State of Delhi held that holding an opinion against the Prime Minister or his actions or criticism of the actions of the government cannot be considered as sedition under Section 124A of IPC. So, effectively, the Delhi High Court said that criticism of the government is the hallmark of democracy, and as a matter of fact, the essence of democracy is criticism of the government. So, this statement, that is, as a matter of fact, the essence of democracy is criticism of the government, can be asked with respect to freedom of speech and expression and also with respect to sedition. Now, we have already discussed about the Indian Express newspaper versus Union of India, whereby the Supreme Court held that freedom of speech does not only help in balance and stability of a democratic society, but also gives a sense of self-attainment. So, in this case, four important purposes of free speech and expression were set out. These were: it helps an individual to attain self fulfillment, it assists in discovery of truth, it strengthens the capacity of an individual in participating in decision making, and it provides a mechanism by which it would be possible to establish a reasonable balance between stability and social change. So, in this analysis, we have tried to understand the importance of freedom of speech and expression, and also when can such freedom of speech and expression gets converted into sedition. When such words written or spoken amounts to incitement to violence or intention, or they create public disorder, or they cause disturbance of public peace. And this has been stated in the Supreme Court judgment of Kedarnath Singh versus State of Bihar. So, in this analysis, through this particular news, we try to understand three important aspects. First is with respect to the National Minority Commission. Second is with respect to freedom of speech and expression and important Supreme Court judgments. And third is about the term sedition as has been defined under IPC and also important Supreme Court judgments with respect to the term sedition. And also the fact that when does freedom of speech and expression gets converted into sedition and when state has the power to restrict such freedom of speech and expression. So with this analysis, let us move on to our next news discussion. Now the next news to be discussed appears on page number 12 in the FAQ section. It says, can antibody test help tackle COVID-19? Why have states complained about the test being inaccurate in many cases? And should India use both RT-PCR and antibody test? Now the rapid testing kits which the state governments were using to detect antibodies with respect to coronavirus were throwing unreliable results or were giving unpredictable results. So in this regard, the government has said the ICMR, that is Indian Council of Medical Research, has said to use RT-PCR test which is based on the RNA of the disease. Now RT-PCR stands for real-time reverse transcription polymerase chain reaction. So this particular topic becomes important from the perspective of general science in your prelims examination. Now at the outset, let us understand the difference between antigen and antibody. Now antigen causes disease or allergic reaction, whereas antibody fight against foreign substances in the body which causes illness due to antigen. So we understand that there are two ways to find out the coronavirus. One is with respect to finding out the RNA of the coronavirus, and second is to find out the antibodies which has been generated in response to the coronavirus. So this particular news has highlighted that RT-PCR test is more reliable as compared to test with respect to antibodies. So it highlights that RT-PCR test is a direct test, and this test involves extracting RNA or ribonucleic acid, which is the genetic material of the virus, and also checks if it shares the same genetic sequence as that of SARS-CoV-2 virus. And it takes roughly around 4 hours or more in completing the test. Whereas with respect to the antibody test, it is an indirect test that detects the presence and quantity of antibodies that are produced by the immune system to battle the infection. Now the problem here is that antibodies can show up between 9 to 28 days. So if a person is infected and there are antibodies, then such person needs to be isolated. And if a person is not isolated, then such person can spread the disease or the coronavirus. So with respect to this indirect test, it is fast, portable and relatively inexpensive. But its results are not very sure or not very accurate. However, the positive thing is that it can be conducted en masse and can also play a role in determining the degree of herd immunity. Further, this test can help the government authorities to decide on which regions to put in a lockdown. So the question remains is that why the RT-PCR test is more reliable as compared to the antibody test. Now this particular news highlights that the sequencing of genomes with respect to coronavirus is well understood by experts, and now they have learned to differentiate these from the viruses. And it is because of this that tests started giving more accurate results with respect to coronavirus. And because of this accuracy, the RT-PCR test began to be followed as a gold standard with respect to detecting the coronavirus. Now here it highlights that the only way in which this test turns negative is fact that when the actual sample does not have the virus or the swab was not properly administered and too little of the virus was taken out. So the RT-PCR test is more accurate because now the experts can sequence the genomes of the coronavirus and can differentiate the genome of coronavirus from other viruses. Now coming to the antibody test, so the question remains that why is this particular test with respect to antibody is imperfect. It says that not enough studies have been done on the antibodies and the profile of recovered patients. Further, it says that sometimes the antibodies may be produced in response to a closely related pathogen, that is, which is not coronavirus. But still, the body has antibody with respect to some other pathogen or some other diseases or some other allergy. So at times the antibody result does not show accuracy with respect to this presence of coronavirus as it can show presence of other pathogen as well. And it says that sometimes they may not be the right kind to counter the infection. So it was because of the inaccurate results of antibody test of coronavirus, complaints began pouring in from all across the country. And in this regard, now the health ministry has announced that by the end of May, India will have the kits that are made in India for antibody as well as RT-PCR test. So in this news analysis, you must know the two tests with respect to the coronavirus. The one is RT-PCR test, which is a direct test, and this test involves extraction of the RNA or the antigen. Whereas the second test is an indirect test with respect to the antibody tests. An antigen causes disease or allergic reaction in a body. An antibody fights against such diseases or foreign substances causing illness due to such antigens. So this topic primarily becomes important from the perspective of your prelims examination from general science purview. The next news to be discussed appears on page number 1. It says states scrap the barrel as revenues dry up. They face mounting cost of lockdown. Now because of the national lockdown and its extension, production of goods and services both at the state as well as in the center has come to a grinding halt. And this has overall resulted in lower revenue both for the center as well as for the states. Further, this lower revenue has translated into lower tax collection for the center as well as states. So the problem is that because of lower tax collection, center is not able to pass on the benefits to the states. So now states have become dependent on center, especially with respect to tax devolutions. Now this is because decline in tax collection for states impacts not only their revenue but also severely affects and hamper their ability to deal with the situation of COVID-19 virus because states are at the forefront with respect to fighting the coronavirus. So it is in this regard that this news highlights that states scrap the barrel as revenues dry up for the states. So the question remains that how state taxes have been impacted. Now with respect to the present status, this news mentions that tax collections through state taxes such as excise duty on liquor, petroleum products, stamp duty, registration of vehicles, etc. have come to a grinding halt because there is no such activity taking place as of now. And according to the Reserve Bank of India, the tax revenue for the states through their state taxes account for 45% of total revenue of the states. So overall we can say that 45% of the revenue of the states has come to a grinding halt because of lack of any economic activity. And this is also because there have been no new vehicle and property registrations because of the lockdown. Further, there has been a ban on sale of liquor, and because of these, tax revenues of the state themselves have reduced by 80 to 90%. So reduction of tax revenue by 80 to 90% hampers or impacts the revenue generation capacity of the state. Now the next aspect highlighted in this regard is transfer from center to states. It says that transfer of finances from center to states comprise the following. First, devolution of state share in taxes. Second, finance commission grants, that is post devolution grants. And third, transfers for centrally sponsored schemes. So these are the different mechanisms through which state gets finances from the central government. Now the impact for this particular news highlights that because of lower tax collection for the center, this will also lead to decrease in transfer of finances from center to states. Further, this news also says that there has also been delay in payment of GST compensation to states. So because of all these aspects, the revenue of state is drying up, and the finance with respect to revenue of states has been impacted by 80 to 90% as per the Reserve Bank of India. Now this topic with respect to fiscal developments and distribution of taxes among states has been discussed in detail by Baswa sir in volume 2 part 2 of the economic survey. So please go through this particular video in order to understand the exact details with respect to fiscal developments and also with respect to transfer of taxes among different states. Further, this video also discusses in detail about vertical distribution of taxes from center to states and also about horizontal distribution of taxes among states. Further, this video also discusses in detail about grants by the Finance Commission of India, which is constituted under Article 280 of the Indian Constitution. So to understand the economic aspect of transfer of taxes from center to states, please go through the part 2 of volume 2 of economic survey done comprehensively by Baswa sir. With this, let's move on to our next news discussion. The next news to be discussed appears on the last page on page number 14. It says documenting the last honey hunting group of Arunachal Pradesh. Award-winning film She Lupo, which chronicles a skill, is likely to die with half a dozen men from Buddhist Sherdukpen community. So this particular news highlights about the Sherdukpen community of Arunachal Pradesh. Hence, this topic becomes important from your prelims perspective with respect to history and culture. Now, this news highlights that Chi Lupo, a documentary film, has been adjudged as the best documentary at 10th Dada Saheb Phalke International Film Festival Awards of 2020. And this film mentions about the honey hunting skill of Sherdukpen community. Now, Chi refers to honey and Lupo refers to hunter. So, overall, it means honey hunter in the local Sherdukpen dialect. Now, the Sherdukpen community is mainly found in the West Kamen district of Arunachal Pradesh, as you can see in this picture here. Now, as you can see in this physical map of Arunachal Pradesh, this area is comparatively surrounded by mountains. So, the Sherdukpen community inhabits the mountainous region and live in coexistence with other communities of the area, namely the Monpas, who are the ethnic community of Arunachal Pradesh. Now, as you can see in this map, Arunachal Pradesh borders Bhutan, China, as well as Myanmar. So this becomes another important aspect from your geography perspective with respect to map of Arunachal Pradesh. So in this regard, let us also learn some of the other important aspects about the Sherdukpen tribe. So the Sherdukpen tribe derives its name from the term Sher and Tukpen, which are villages in western Arunachal Pradesh. The tribe has inhabited this mountainous region and has lived in coexistence with the Monpas as well as other ethnic groups of the area. Now the Sherdukpen community celebrates Khiksaba festival, and the Khiksaba festival is celebrated from 12 December to 16 December in the Rupa village of West Kamen district of Arunachal Pradesh. Now Khiksaba is an indigenous non-Buddhist festival of Sherdukpen, and it is dedicated to appease the forest deities and other mountain spirits. Further, Rep Lapshang is the harvest festival which is also popularly celebrated by the community. Now, the festival of Rep Lapshang is also presided by the local shaman, that is Jiji, instead of the Buddhist lamas. Further, the Sherdukpen people also celebrate Buddhist festivals similar to other Buddhist communities in the Himalayan region. And the Sherdukpen community also perform the Tibetan charm dance, which is commonly seen even among the Sherdukpen festivals. Further, Losar is the Tibetan New Year and is also a special occasion for the Sherdukpen community. And the Sherdukpen community also celebrate Wang, which is also celebrated twice a year in the honor of Buddha. So we understand that the Sherdukpen tribe celebrates both Buddhist as well as non-Buddhist festival. Thus this topic becomes important from the perspective of history and culture in your prelims examination. Now the next news to be discussed appears on page number 9. There are two news here. First is with respect to the fact that drugs approved for use in emergency, and the drug here is Remdesivir, which has been approved by United States FDA, whereby United States has granted FDA emergency use authorization with respect to the drug named Remdesivir. This news highlights that American authorities has approved an experimental drug for emergency use on coronavirus patients. This approval is the latest step in global push to find variable treatments and a vaccine for the coronavirus. Now, it's important to note that remdesivir is an antiviral drug and was initially developed to treat Ebola as well as Middle East respiratory syndrome. So, these facts becomes important about remdesivir, that remdesivir has been used to treat Ebola, Middle East respiratory syndrome, and now it has also received approval from US FDA with respect to treatment on coronavirus patients. Now, the next news highlights that China and United States spar over Taiwan. Now, this particular news becomes important because China always considers Taiwan its provinces and United States supports independence of Taiwan. So, in this regard, let's go through the important highlights of this particular news. Now, both these news becomes important from the perspective of current events of international importance and with respect to remdesivir under the perspective of general science. So, with respect to the news on Taiwan, it states that United States of America has backed participation of Taiwan at United Nations. And this move of the United States has been condemned by China as it considers Taiwan as its province and its inalienable part. So here comes the problem with respect to Taiwan, that China considers Taiwan its inalienable part and also its province. Now, as you can see in the map, this is where Taiwan is located. And there is a Taiwan Strait between China as well as Taiwan. Further, we see East China Sea north of Taiwan, whereas we find South China Sea in the southwest of Taiwan and Pacific Ocean in the southeast of Taiwan. Further, just below Taiwan, Philippines is located, and across the East China Sea, Japan is located. So all these locations become important with respect to your world map. Further, it says that China has claimed sovereignty over Taiwan since the end of Chinese Civil War in 1949, when Mao Zedong swept power in China, and this led to defeat of the nationalist government, whereby they fled to Taiwan. Further, it highlights that China insists that nations cannot have official relations with both China and Taiwan. And because of this, as of now, Taiwan maintains formal diplomatic ties or relation with only a few countries. And in this regard, United States is Taiwan's most important friend and protector. Now, Tsai Ing-wen is Taiwan's first female president as she was elected in January 2016. So, Taiwan as of now has a democratically elected president named Tsai Ing-wen. So, all these facts about Taiwan becomes important from your UPSC perspective. Thus, from your prelims perspective, this topic gets covered under current events of international importance, world geography, specifically physical world geography, and also general science with respect to the medicine of remdesivir, as it has been granted FDA approval by United States in order to treat coronavirus patients. Now, after today's discussion, let's go through the summary for today's prelims. Today we discussed about the National as well as State Minorities Commission and the fact that they are constituted under respective Act of Parliament as well as state legislature. Hence, the minority commissions are statutory bodies. Further, we discussed about other members as well as chairperson of the National Minority Commission, as they have a tenure of 3 years. Now, we also discussed about the minority religion, as there are 6 minority religions, but earlier there were only 5 minority religions, and Jainism as a part of minority religion was added much later in the year 2014. So the minority religions are Muslims, Christians, Sikhs, Buddhists, Zoroastrians, that is Parsis, and Jains. Further, we discussed that recommendations of National Minority Commissions are laid before each House of the Parliament, as well as the Comptroller and Auditor General can audit the accounts of National Commission for Minorities, and also the fact that National Commission for Minorities has power of civil court. Now next, we also discussed about sedition. Sedition amounts to incitement of violence, whereby we understood that only when certain activities amounts to incitement to violence, which creates public disorder and which creates disturbance of public peace, then such activities can be termed as sedition, as per Kedar Nath Singh versus State of Bihar, whereby the Supreme Court has given these judgments. Further, in the judgment of Balwant Singh versus State of Punjab, the court held that mere sloganeering without incitement to offence does not amount to sedition. Next, we discussed with respect to Javed Habib versus State of Delhi that criticism of the government or the Prime Minister or his council does not amount to sedition. Next, with respect to Ram Manohar Lohia versus State of Bihar, we discussed about difference between security of state, public order, and law and order. Now, with respect to sedition, we also discussed about freedom of speech and expression and when does freedom of speech and expression converts into sedition. In this, we discussed the famous case of Shreya Singhal versus Union of India, which declared Section 66A of Information Technology Act as unconstitutional. Hereby, the Supreme Court held that freedom of speech and expression has three aspects: first, discussion, then, advocacy, and then, incitement. And only when the aspect of incitement comes into picture, then the case of sedition can be looked into. Further, we discussed that freedom of speech and expression is important for democracy to thrive, and in this regard, liberty of speech and expression is of cardinal importance. Next, we discussed about the RT-PCR test with respect to antigen, which is a direct test, and rapid testing kits with respect to antibodies, which is an indirect test. Now, antigens cause illness, and antibodies fights antigens. Further, we also discussed the fact that fall in state taxes due to halting of economic activities has resulted in strain on state exchequer. Further, we also discussed about She Lupo, which is a documentary film and has been awarded as the best documentary at 10th Dada Saheb International Film Festival Awards of 2020. In this festival, it discusses about Sherdukpen tribe. Now, She Lupo means honey hunter. This tribe mostly resides in West Kamen district of Arunachal Pradesh. Next, we discussed about Khik Saba, which is an indigenous non-Buddhist festival. Also about Rep Lekshang, which is a harvest festival of Sherdukpen community, and also the fact that they celebrate Tibetan New Year, that is Losar. Further, we discussed about Remdesivir, as this drug has been granted FDA emergency use authorization by the United States to treat coronavirus patients. Remdesivir is an antiviral drug and was initially used to treat Ebola and Middle East respiratory syndrome. Further, we also discussed about Taiwan and also the fact that China claims it as its province. We also discussed about location of Taiwan from the perspective of world geography and also related water bodies, that is Taiwan Strait between China and Taiwan, East China Sea, South China Sea and Pacific Ocean, and also location of Philippines and Japan with respect to Taiwan. So these can be said to be the summary for prelims for today's analysis. Now, after our discussion, this form your question for the day. The question is, set the following countries or provinces from south to north. Options are 1. Taiwan, 2nd. Japan, 3rd. Philippines, and 4th. Indonesia. Question is, select the correct answer from the code given below. Options are A. 2314, B. 4312, C. 4321, and D. 4132. Now, coming to the answer of yesterday, the question was, consider the following statements about the index of 8 core industries. Options were 1. It is released by National Statistical Office. No, the statement is incorrect. Second, the base year for calculation of the index is 2011-12. Yes, the statement is correct. So the question was, which of the statements given above are correct? So here the correct answer is B, that is 2 only. With this, we come to an end to discussion of today's analysis. Thank you.